listening to Biotech Hangout, a live and unedited weekly discussion of all the latest news in our industry with a group of biotech insiders. My name's Tess Cameron, and my co-hosts today are Sam Fazeli, Luba Greenwood, and Brian Skorney, as well as Yaron Werber, who's going to be joining us shortly. For more information about our hosts and guest speakers, or to listen to our most recent episode, please go to biotechhangout.com. So we have a lot to cover this week, as usual. And I wanted to start with like just a short pop quiz to our to my great co-host this week. When was the last time that we saw the XBI, or when was the last time that we had a biotech hangout with the XBI at like dancing around 105?
Well, that's easy for me to answer. So I've got the Bloomberg right in front of me. So,
So tell
but
us, Sam.
I'll let people who don't have a Bloomberg in front of them to guess. Brian,
Oh, that's a good question. Maybe
uh,
2022?
GP. Let me
You
just get it for
know,
you.
it
Do
was
you know,
not
Tess?
2020. It was not 2022. It was 2021.
No.
Yeah, we have to go all the way back to 2021
Yeah.
to be at a biotech hangout where the XBI was, over, well, I think now it just dropped to under 105, so over 104. Let's call it that. So that's obviously exciting to really see more interest in biotech and having that be driven by a lot of fundamentally good news. And I think one of those pieces of good news that we want to start with today is deals and M&A. And there was a nice analysis that I saw come through from LifeSci Advisors, where they were pointing to year-to-date M&A, and this was before the stuff that was announced this week, being at around 81 billion, with a lot of deals over $1 billion through September. And I think that 81 billion is, a real increase from 2024 full year, not quite at the highs of 2023. But actually, just looking at the number of deals, it's just year to date, with a couple months left in the year, we're looking at about 30 deals, more than that now, with a couple of deals that were announced this week. And that's actually pretty in line with like full years for many of the past couple of years since 2020. So let's get into some of those deals that were announced this week. And Sam, maybe I'll start with you and Akero and Novo Nordisk.
Yeah, sure. But if you don't mind, Tess, just beforehand, I want to highlight something. If you look at these deals that we've been seeing, so Akero Novo Nordisk, Pfizer, Metsera. Think about the story behind them. This is the reason that people should be investing in biotech in general, or at least that's the reason that we put forward as the reason to invest in biotech, which is one reason is pharma needs pipeline. So we had Pfizer. I mean, I can keep going backwards, right? But let's just take these two examples. Pfizer tried to develop their own asset in obesity, didn't work out. Straight away, go and buy it in. You're either in license, or you buy it in. In this case, they bought Metsera. Novo Nordisk, one of the leaders of, without dispute, in the obesity metabolic disease world, tried in the MASH space with an FGF 21 approach, didn't look compelling, buys a company. That is why I think people should be thinking, and I think that's why perhaps the market's picking up for the sector as a whole. I'm not obviously talking about any specific stock here. Um, this is what happens. Pharma companies need pipeline. They hit a brick wall. There are assets out there available. And of course, we all want them to buy the company that we have on our list or in our portfolios. But in the end, it's good for everybody. So in this particular case, Tess, we have Novo Nordisk buying, and this is, I don't know, the sixth week in a row that we've had an M&A deal. And maybe tomorrow we'll have two with the rumor about Johnson & Johnson and Protagonist. So this is a deal which Novo Nordisk announced yesterday, $5.2 billion up to for Akero. Akero's froxyfermin is based on our analysis, has leading efficacy data. There are other things to consider, of course, in the MASH space, so the metabolic liver disease that follows often obesity, or not even in some cases obesity. Um, but you don't have to be overtly obese to have potentially some MASH ongoing underneath. So they showed some compelling data: 40% fibrosis improvement at 24 weeks, 75% growing to 75% at 96 weeks. Lots of details we can go at here, but when you look at the entirety of the trial, it was strong, better than what we've seen with some of the others, and of course continued to evolve and get better over time. It looks better on efficacy than definitely what Novo Nordisk had themselves. It looks better on efficacy if you don't adjust for placebo. If you do adjust for placebo, it's slightly different, not that much better than Roche's 89 bio acquisition for pegozafermin. And then, of course, when you come to GSK Boston's efimosfermin, which of course these are drug names that we all love because they get so convoluting in terms of the structure of the names. But they all show good resolution. Of course, in these trials, you have to be very careful into what patients were included, F1, F2, F3. But with the Akero, we've even seen some good results on F4 patients in the Symmetry trial. 39% had improvement, etc. And MASH resolutions 3 times placebo. These are all very significant data. Then, of course, you get to tolerability and safety. And you look at it, and it's kind of the inverse. You get GI effects, side effects with the Akero product that is higher by the look of things than the data that we see from the other drugs. But interestingly, discontinuation rates are all the same across these. So who's got the best product? Who knows? But these GI side effects do worry me a little bit if we're going to be looking at a combination with semaglutide, which is obviously the active ingredient in Wegovy, and the semaglutide, which is the active ingredient in Wegovy. And then lastly, it comes down to dosing. Currently, the dosing for the Akero's compound is once weekly. You get the 89 bio drug that's twice weekly and pre-filled syringe, as opposed to a lyophilized powder. And then, of course, you go to GSK's possibility, potentially a once monthly dosing. There are other side effects that we need to keep an eye out for, particularly bone mineral density, which is supposed to be a class effect, but there seems to be some differences between the drugs. All in all, it's the acquisition that Nova's just done appears to be bringing it what looks like the best efficacy in fibrosis improvement, and particularly F4 disease. But on the side effect profile, maybe they're giving they have some issues relative to the others. Of course, time will tell. These are all relatively early studies. And then dosing needs to be worked out. And maybe if you're going to get it in combination, how do you do that? So again, I want to highlight this is Novo Nordisk, which is one of the key players in this space, i.e., obesity, MASH, and they have already semaglutide that's got good MASH data. Let's not forget, a lot of folks got worried when the GLP-1 started reporting MASH data, saying, "Wait a minute, what's the investment case for these guys then?" Which, of course, the folks who had thought about it long enough knew that this is a disease area where combinations are likely to be needed, or drugs following GLP-1s are not going to be the answer to everything. And here Novo proves that investment thesis. So it's great to see. Of course, we have a whole bunch of other companies that are still in the space, and it will be interesting to see how that goes. And that's it. I'll leave it at
Yeah.
that.
But
Tess.
I think it's interesting, Sam, maybe just building on what you said. I mean, there's some companies left in the space, but we are looking at such a different picture for NASH companies than we were a couple of years ago, right? Or MASH
Mhm.
companies. And there were, so far this year, right? Even just in the past couple of weeks now with Akero and 89 Bio, Boston Pharma earlier this year with GSK. I'm having a hard time thinking about another company that is like independent, clinical stage, biotech with, a clinical stage FGF21, right? They've
Yeah.
kind of been snapped up.
They
And
have.
I think that, I think that certainly the focus on cardiometabolic by a lot of strategics has been a part of this. I also think that all of these companies have a lot to thank Madrigal for really showing that, the market really is, that it really is a big market and that there's, a high enough unmet need to really support,
Mm.
a price point that that can help deliver
Yeah,
on a very robust peak sales number. So it's a very different place than we were looking at
exactly.
a
But
few years ago.
let's have a bet, Tess. What's your bet that in 6 months, 12 months, there will be a whole bunch of companies that come out of the woodwork, assets that people had forgotten about, with a slight twist on them, with an FGF21, or even other mechanisms that are all going to end up coming out of stealth, or not even stealth, or even, I haven't looked yet to see what's happening in China. Are there assets in China that folks are going to go and bring in and create new cos out of?
Yeah,
I bet you there will be.
I would not bet against you, Sam. Um, so let's go to the other deal this week, the BMS Orbital deal, and maybe Yaron, you could kick us off here, and Sam, I know you have comments on this one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Hoping you can hear me okay. So, the next innovation in CAR T is really going to be in vivo, sort of bedside LNP driven modalities. And so this is a $1.5 billion deal for Orbital for a CD19 CAR T using their proprietary mRNA platform to deliver it in vivo. And we're seeing a lot of that now, both in the BCMA side, obviously several companies working on CD19, and they're all early. There's been some proof of concept already in the clinic, in general in the space. And look, we know that even J&J is definitely looking at some preclinical assets targeting BCMA as well. As much as they think Carvykti is a winner, obviously everybody is looking for something a lot more easier that doesn't require pheresis and it doesn't require really, ultimately sun conditioning and obviously processing. So that's definitely a hot space worth following from now on.
I think
Absolutely. And Sam, what do you have to add on that?
just to add a little bit, remember, this is an acquisition by a company that's got pretty much, in our view, the leading anti-CD19 CAR T in Breyanzi. Um, my assumption is that this is going to be obviously when you read the press release, the Orbital's been focused on the I&I application. And for I&I, and I don't know your own, I'm sure I think you agree in that you can't go with the standard CAR T process, right? You need to have this in vivo approach, to off-the-shelf approach, to make it a lot easier for those sort of patients to take value from it, unless you were aiming at the absolute end stage autoimmune diseases. So it's interesting that it was Bristol Myers that did it. So any CAR T company, as Yaron said, you talk to, is talking up the idea of in vivo, which of course is logical. I mean, it just makes it so much easier to deliver these agents and make it so much easier not to worry about academic versus community, et cetera, particularly in the oncology space.
Yeah,
No, it's
absolutely.
spot on. The AEs of the traditional approach are just non-starters, and that came out very clear about a year ago at ACI for I&I.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think we're seeing a lot of interest in really this transient, this transient approach, right? So within the in vivo CAR T landscape, right? Like there's a lot of different ways to think about and look at the in vivo CAR T landscape. Certainly one is just is it transient or non-transient? In the kind of non-transient bucket, you have a bunch of different integrating approaches, right? So Interius, was one of those that was like an integrating, CAR T. I think it's interesting with both Orbital and Capstan, which, I think they shared a similar upfront, acquisition amount for, very early, either late preclinical or early clinical companies. Um, and I think it'll be interesting to see how the different applications for these companies really emerges in terms of the autoimmune, and I think with potentially both Orbital and Capstan, which really had leads in autoimmune. The non transient approach like the transient approach really does seem to lend itself there, right, for these broad patient populations, and dealing with something that is certainly a very severe disease but non-lethal. And it'll be very interesting, I think, to also see how the integrating approaches evolve over the next several years, with I think Interius really being the deal that's happened on the integrating side this year. I think these couple of deals that we've seen in the in vivo CAR T space also really go back to Sam's point about a lot of the M&A this year really being about like filling out pipelines, and filling out the early side of that the early side of the R&D pipeline as well, with platforms like these in vivo CAR Ts that can be applied across a number of different disease areas. And I think another theme on that like early pipeline, build out for pharmas that we wanted to hit on are these AI pharma deals. And Luba, you've been watching those very closely, and we'd love to get your insights and perspectives on a few of those that happened this week.
Oh, Luba's just been kicked off.
Oh, Luba's being kicked
Yeah.
off. My
Well,
goodness.
no, I mean, who dares do that?
Who dares kick Luba off? She will. We know that Luba will
It happens all
return.
the time with Twitter for some reason.
It's probably Elon.
But never to Luba. Maybe it happens to us, but never to Luba. We will restore that inequity quickly. But while we do that, let's talk about like we have one side of the ledger, M&A. That has actually been returning a lot of capital over the past couple of months to investors, particularly biotech specialists, as well as some of the larger mutual funds that have pretty high biotech exposure, like Fidelity and Janus and the like. And so, hey, like capital deployment, there are obviously a lot of opportunities to deploy capital in biotech. And we've seen follow-ons, a lot of follow-ons on the market, and we have started to see some IPOs on the market. So I think that there have been 9 IPOs this year. We had almost all of those were IPOs that happened in January or very early February, and then there was nothing, and then there was LB Pharma, and now we've seen MapLight flip their S1. And MapLight is a company that is really looking to, improve on Cobenfy, which was the drug that Karuna developed that was acquired by BMS and is currently being launched. Um, and MapLight is really looking to kind of optimize and improve on Cobenfy, and they are raising money to fund trials in schizophrenia. And I think this is really another great example of biotechs kind of leading the way and showing big pharma where there is a lot of opportunity. And Karuna really did that through their data, Cerevel as well, and MapLight, really coming out with, what they view as a potentially even superior, version to that. And so, they have flipped their S1, and we'll get to see over the coming weeks just how that IPO unfolds. But it does draw on a theme of continued interest and recognition that there's a lot of it really important innovation that we need to follow in neuroscience. I mean, AbbVie and acquiring Gilgamesh, a psychedelics company, is another great example of that this year. These are big markets with a lot of unmet need, and it's encouraging to see continued investor interest in these areas. I am hopeful that we now have Luba's
I
speaking
am
rights
back.
restored,
Yes.
which is fantastic. So, Luba, why don't I turn it over to you on the theme of filling early kind of pharma pipelines, including with, kind of capabilities and platforms. Tell us about these AI deals this week.
Yeah, thanks so much. So AI, we've seen there's like a love and hate relationship between pharma and AI. Initially, everybody wanted AI platforms, then everybody was platformed out. Then pharma decided to build their own AI capabilities. Now they realize that they should stick to what they know and partner with AI companies. So we've seen quite a bit of AI platform technology partnerships with pharma. So what I mean by that is anywhere where artificial intelligence is enabling discovery or translation. So first, I'd like to talk about the recent deal that AstraZeneca just signed with a company called Algen Biotechnologies. It's for 555 million, which we don't know what the upfront is, but it's mostly a buy bucks deal, but still pretty exciting for Algen as well, and shows commitment of pharma like AstraZeneca to utilizing AI in drug discovery. This one is in particular targeting to find new targets in immunology. It's a multi-target research collaboration, so not just around one target. And what Algen will do for AstraZeneca is they have a platform called Algen Brain, and they'll be using that platform to identify and not validate novel targets, specifically in immune-related diseases. And AstraZeneca will get exclusive rights to develop and commercialize any of the resulting therapies that Algen Brain will find for them. AZ is not taking equity stakes. Sometimes in these deals, pharma companies structure it so that they take equity position. Here, that's not happening. And why is this interesting? And exactly why did they choose Algen versus others? What's really neat about it is that Algen technology provides AI and also combining functional genomics and CRISPR screening and CRISPR modulation. And it maps out basically a causal link between gene regulation, disease progression in human cell type. So, if you think about it, it's a platform that uses single cell gene modulation. They're using high throughput screening, AI models, all to figure out which genes are therapeutically actionable and which ones are not. So, it will help a company like AstraZeneca with translation from human biology and our understanding into immunology and finding novel targets around which they'll have exclusive rights. AZ has been pushing into cell and gene therapy, and they want to expedite the discovery in that space as well, discovery in advanced modalities. They did also earlier this year do a multi-billion-dollar deal in this space. So it's all pushing towards the right direction for them. I think it's a great deal, and also very good for AI in general. Again, even with all this enthusiasm, I think if we step back, we haven't yet seen an AI drug discovery enabled drug that has been approved in immunology. But that doesn't mean that that's not going to happen soon. So that's one AI type of drug discovery preclinical translational biology type of a deal that we've seen. We've also seen another one with a company called BenchSci. I'm actually on the board of BenchSci. It's a fantastic company based out of Canada in Toronto, where probably people know University of Toronto is one of the top places for software engineering and that type of talent. So they have just done a deal with Sanofi, which is a licensing deal for 3 years, where Sanofi will be using a platform that BenchSci has built called Ascent, also for preclinical research operations. So this is where they're taking, think of it as a disease biology AI co-pilot, where it takes in the scientific literature, proprietary data that internally Sanofi has, experimental metadata, and graphs it out into basically a biological evidence knowledge map. So it can help you everything with triaging your targets, making a better experimental design and optimize it, and generate hypotheses and new mechanism of action. So all good news for those companies in AI that want to partner with pharma.
Thank you so much, Luba, for that great overview. I think sticking with the new mechanisms, Nilo Therapeutics is a company that launched on Wednesday this week, and they are taking a pretty interesting
Mhm.
approach to the immune system. So tell us about that, Luba.
Yeah, thank you. I have been personally obsessed with this type of mechanism of action and just the correlation between in the mechanisms understanding the effects of regulation of circuit in basically brain body pathways, right? And vagal nerves and just a nervous system and how it relates to regulating the immune system and so I'm super excited. There's been a lot of research, and I think I talked about this a bit before in some of the other podcasts. I think this is super highly unfunded area. I was wondering why more companies, more funds are not interested or looking into it. So now that I saw this, I got very excited. So what is Nilo? It's a biotech. They were in stealth for many years. They just raised 101 million in Series A funding. And what they're doing is exactly what I just mentioned. They're modulating neural circuits to kind of control immune system and therefore inflammatory diseases. So I love just seeing what they come up with and learning how the brain connects to inflammation. Their thesis is, if you go after and you target your central master regulator circuits, like body-brain pathways, you can coordinate multi-pathway immune modulation. In a much better way and with less resistance. So it's academic. The science is built from an academic institution of Zucker's lab, and he has been shown that there's certain neurons that actually can dial up, or dial down inflammation in certain animal models. So again, very early, the evidence is in animal models, but I think has a lot of potential not just for them, but I think for the whole field. So I wish them luck. They have quite a great backing. Column Group, DCVC, Lux Capital, Gates Foundation all participate in this round. So I don't know, Tess, if you've seen anything that comes across your desk in this space. If you do, that's great. I love it. You should fund it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting approach, and great to see them moving forward. Luba, we're sticking with you. We're sticking with you for a few minutes. This is why
I'm
we
on a
needed
hot
to
seat
make
now that
sure.
my mic is on. So now you got to make me work. I like it.
Exactly, exactly. This is why we needed you to come back. So we've talked about, money kind of coming back into biotech through M&As. We've talked about where some of that money is being deployed. Tell us about new funds, Luba.
Yeah, so I love seeing new funds. I think everybody in biotech, if you're an operator out there, we're all very excited whenever there is a new fund, especially well-capitalized fund that is interested in, that has a investment thesis that is broad. So we have a new, I think I'm pronouncing it as Ascenta. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly,
I
capital,
think you
which
are,
I
yes.
think okay. If I'm not, I apologize to the founders, and but they're two ex Moderna leaders, and they just closed on a new fund. They're out of Florida, which sounds nice and warm today, and it's a 325 million fund. And what they're looking for is they're looking at development stage biotech, so things that are in the clinic, phase one, phase two. They're looking into companies that have multiple assets, so not a single asset, but multiple drugs in the pipeline. I like that they're not passive backers, right? They're sort of not saying, "Hey, we're going to deploy this money." They have already deployed. They say up to 100 million in six startups, including some companies that we've covered here, like Odyssey. And again, I also like that they're kind of reducing the risk by providing and partnering on the technical, operational, and scientific side. And they're also pretty open across multiple therapeutic areas. So I think their approach is good, and it's always nice to see new entrants into the field.
Wonderful, fantastic. Okay, well, we'll give you a short break, Luba,
Ooh,
from all of that,
nice. Alrighty.
and let's move on to some of the data that we've seen come out over the past week. We've had a number of readouts, and let's start, Sam, with one that you've highlighted, which is Arcus and their monotherapy data in renal cell carcinoma.
Yeah, sure. So, Tess, Arcus is best known for the story of TIGIT, right? Which is the deal they have with Gilead, which still is ongoing, despite the fact that many other TIGITs, excuse me, in terms of the approaches that they've had from some other companies have been shelved. But this is not about TIGIT. This is about a drug that targets HIF-1 alpha, where there is a drug already on the market from Merck, and that's Welireg. That's for a very specific group of patients with kidney cancer. And this time, these guys have now pulled together the data from their dose ranging study, about 121 patients, phase one data, and frankly, it looks pretty good. I mean, it is a dose ranging study, so that's important to realize when you're looking at the AEs specifically. And it's a $5 billion addressable market based on our modeling. And they've shown what looks like better progression-free survival and response rates that we've seen with Merck's Welireg, although obviously we're doing cross-trial comparisons, and one's 121 patients, the other is 374 patients, but 121 is still respectable. And we find that at least preclinically, there was some reason to think that this difference might exist. And now this suggests that you might be seeing it in the clinic too. So what are the differences? Like 12.2 months median progression-free survival versus 5.6, which is a big difference. Now, median follow-up is pretty decent for the casdatifan data. Remember, the Welireg is belzutifan. So median follow-up is about 15 months. So this progression-free survival, we'll see how that evolves as time goes by. And then you've got a confirmed response rate of 31%, which is better than the 23% that we've seen with Welireg. Side effect profiles seem about the same. Grade 3, 4 AEs, 60% for one, 62% for Merck. Discontinuations, not available for these guys, but 6% for Merck. Grade 5, we saw some in the Merck trial, but not necessarily related to the drug. So in general, it looks pretty decent. None of the anemia, which is of course part of the package with this approach, led to discontinuations. So the data looks quite good. We think that there's a room for this, and the share price duly responded. On the day that it was released, it jumped from the close of $13. 35 cents back on the Friday, the 3rd of October, to a peak of 16 and a bit dollars. And it's now settled down a little bit higher. Of course, it's a bunch of patients from different dose groups put together. It's a phase one, single arm, and we need to see the progress of this. But it's nice to see this happening. And it's interesting that this was a drug that Gilead backed away from, and they stayed with the TIGIT, which we're going to get some more data from AstraZeneca at ESMO. And we'll see for the Artemidio-1 trial. Let's see how that pans out. And these guys, TIGIT is in the same sort of idea in that they're not FC active, and therefore that is something that these couple of companies that are left in the space tout as being a key element of why they're able to continue, whereas the others, Roche et al., had FC active. So, sorry, they're FC silenced and FC active. So, good news for these guys, and we'll see how that all pans out over time.
Great. Thank you very much, Sam. Well, Sam, you were, talking actually in the topic that kicked us off, which was the Akero acquisition. We were talking about metabolic in the metabolic space and just how much activity is there. And I think we're actually at a pretty interesting time where I think in the next 6 months, we're actually going to start seeing a lot of readouts on new mechanisms for obesity and new mechanisms that could actually be applicable, across potentially a few different disease areas. And one of these mechanisms that there's been interest in and then concern about is CB1, right? And CB1 had historically seen some weight loss. Novo acquired Inversago, who had that had a CB1, and they came out with some data in the end of 2024 that I think underwhelmed a little bit in terms of weight loss, and there were also concerns about the neuropsychiatric side effects. And I think those concerns were recapitulated in a diabetic kidney disease trial that came out this year. Now, there was a lot of interest in Sky's molecule. They also have a CB1, and maybe Sam, you can tell us why their drug was a little bit different from Novo's and kind of what the hope was, and then what we saw this week.
Yeah, sure. So Sky Biosciences is not one that really shows up very often when people talk about obesity, but I always found their idea interesting. As we know, CB1 is an old new mechanism, right? It's something that has been postulated before for a while. But of course, as you rightly said, you get these issues with neuropsychiatric problems when you've got an oral drug that penetrates the blood-brain barrier. So here they thought, maybe we can deal with this by using an antibody, which shouldn't distribute as much as we well know from the Alzheimer's world. They all need a brain shuttle to try and get that concentration up with anti-amyloid antibodies. So here they're trying to just use a standard antibody, nimacimab, that binds CB1 and should be peripherally restricted, essentially. And so they did a single agent phase two, a phase 2a, 26-week data, and the weight loss underwhelmed. So what's the way forward for this? The weight loss underwhelmed, maybe it's because it's not dosed sufficiently, and it is a bit complicated to dose this. What's the way forward? They suggest there's one way of combining with semaglutide, and of course, when they combine with semaglutide, they saw better efficacy than the semaglutide alone arm. And that's something that they're going to focus on and possibly increase the concentration that you deliver. Now, that makes sense. If you put more antibody in the bloodstream, subcutaneous or whatever way you're going to do it, you should get more target engagement. Let's assume that works. The only worry I have is if you increase the dose, are you going to get some sufficient penetration in the brain that might cause these neuropsychiatric side effects? They've seen none with their drug so far at the doses that we've seen. Maybe the future for this is a combination with semaglutide. And of course, you're dealing with a completely different mechanism, so you don't keep getting additional nausea and vomiting, etc. So where this really fits in the future, etc., who knows? But there is some logic to the approach, which I've always liked the idea of. And we're going to have to see how this data reads out. And we do have some more data coming in Q1 26 when they report the phase 2a extension study. That's it.
Great, great. Thank you for sharing. So I think open questions on that mechanism, and we'll really need to see positive clinical data that shows really competitive weight loss for there to be renewed enthusiasm in that mechanism. Many other mechanisms for obesity that should be reading out over the coming months, which I think quite a bit on the inhibi side. Let's go over to muscle. And Brian, I think maybe if we could have you comment on Dyne's data in DM1, as well as the World Muscle Society and DMD presentations.
Yeah, thanks. So, yeah, the World Muscle Society is ongoing as we speak. I think they had the late breaker sessions just earlier this morning. But a lot of data out of here. I think Dyne is one of the names I cover with some updated data in their DM1 phase 2 study that I think is interesting. Of course, there's a lot of discussions around Sarepta, Regenix, and the DMD gene therapy space, all being addressed to some extent at World Muscle Society. So, maybe just kind of start on the Dyne story. This name has sort of been a little bit of a hot button topic. They're obviously in competition with Avidity for reasonably similar DM1 programs. Avidity is ahead with a bigger program. Dyne is looking at a smaller pivotal path, but there's something that maybe next year both of them are going to be reviewed at the same time pending positive results. So Dyne had pretty extensive 1 year data from their phase 1/2 study, particularly with their pivotal dose this week. And what I would say kind of looks impressive about it is, almost across the board in their slides, they're showing continued improvement. So, VHOT is sort of the main endpoint that the companies are looking at right here, which is a time of how quickly it takes to open your fingers. And it's a little bit better at 12 months than it was at 6 months, which was better than placebo in this study. But then when we start looking across a bunch of the other time function tests, you see a little more improvement from 6 months to 12 months, which I think kind of reinforces the mechanism here, and that you're seeing continued improvement, not just sort of a stabilization of disease or an initial improvement, but continuing to improve. I was most impressed by the quantitative muscle testing total score, which basically from 6 months to 12 months doubled in the effect size. So really showing kind of a pretty nice curve up and to the right in terms of benefit here. So they are enrolling this pivotal cohort right now in DM1, and hopefully we'll see that data around the middle of next year, and should hopefully see a filing after that. Again, obviously Avidity is a little bit ahead of them with a larger study, but I think it's going to be one of these situations we're going to get two data sets from two different size studies, and we'll be comparing things like VHA across trials. And I think Dyne trades at a pretty significant discount to where Avidity does right now. But I think the practicality is they're not that far behind time wise. Could get on the market in a similar time frame. So I thought that data was interesting. Moving on to sort of the DMD side of things. There's a big run up in Sarepta last week, and I'd sort of characterize that as people maybe being less negative. I mean, certainly haven't seen a big change in terms of sentiment on this name after the controversies around the gene therapy, which have led to 2 deaths due to liver toxicity in non-ambulatory patients, and then the back and forth we've seen with the FDA over the summer. Since then things have quieted down a little bit. They have a number of posters showing more long-term data, more 3-year data from a number of their studies, more younger kid data showing, what I think is a pretty diminished liver toxicity profile relative to the older patients. There's also, a single center experience of prophylactic use of sirolimus that's presented at WMS. This is sort of the take that Sarepta has to try to mitigate the liver tox that's occurring with Elevidys. Interestingly enough, this is, Regenix also has data for their DMD therapy. This is a protocol, or sirolimus has been part of the prophylactic protocol that Regenix has been using since the initiation of their studies. And they also show very diminished liver inflammation as a result of sirolimus. So I think talking to docs, there's a little bit of a less of a concern, and maybe more of a hope that using a little bit of a different methodology for trying to control this liver inflammation with sirolimus might mitigate some of the effects. And again, I think a lot of people debate the overall efficacy of Elevidys and the gene therapies in general, and how much evidence there is of a true effect. But I think there is generally a belief among the physicians that there is an effect size here, maybe not something that can easily be quantified. So if the safety profile can be secured a little bit more, may get back to a point where they can start growing sales again. And I think
Great.
that's about it.
Great. Well, thank you, Brian. That's a great overview. I think really important to note, because it ties into one of the companies, Brian, that we'll have you talk about next, is just how important we've seen. We have so many big companies now that are companies that are really founded on RNA technology, right? And you were talking about Dyne, Avidity. These are uh, really important kind of companies in our ecosystem. Alnylam, obviously, and we've really seen a pretty big transformation this year in just investor sentiment for Ionis as another company with a really rich history in this space. One of the first companies to really be doing a lot of work on ASOs, together with Alnylam and some others. And their stock price has more than doubled this year. And they've had a number of readouts. And I think what we wanted to spend a bit of time talking about, Yaron, was their Innovation Day, which I believe you attended. Let's hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Len Schleifer, what used to say, I'm an overnight success 25 years in the making. Well, Ionis is now, I think, becoming an overnight success. And I don't know if that's been 25 years or it's been 30 years at this point. But they really have really finally got to a point that the pipeline is really productive. It's late stage. They actually have a combination of their own products on the market that are doing well. At this point, they have Spinraza to get royalties on from Biogen. They have Wainua uh, doing pretty well in polyneuropathy TTR with AstraZeneca with an auto injector. They took 40% share within a year from Alnylam. Alone, they have Tryngolza for SHTG, which was approved for FCS, familial chylomicronemia syndrome. But much more importantly, to your point, Tess, the stock doubled really on the heels of this SHTG data, severe hypertriglyceridemia, that is now leading to Wall Street to awaken and realize, oh my God, there's actually a big drug here. They showed a 72% reduction in triglycerides and an 85% reduction in acute pancreatitis. Literally, mic drop type data. First time ever you're seeing an acute pancreatitis risk reduction, and they've now launched Donzera, which is an auto-injector every 4 weeks, every 8 weeks, with switch data from other prophylactic hereditary angioedema drugs. And they're just getting started. I mean, next year, there's going to be phase 3 Lp(a) data with Novartis. There's going to be CardioTransform data for Wainua, the biggest study ever in TTR cardiomyopathy. There's going to be phase 3 data from their competitor Ultragenyx in Angelman syndrome. And of course, they're 6 months behind. Neither company is getting any credit for that. And then there's going to be Bepi, that's their hepatitis B ASO in phase 3 with GSK data's next year. There's going to be IgAN factor B data with Roche phase 3 data. And then finally with Biogen MapTau data in Alzheimer's and early Alzheimer's from the Celia, 436 patients at a year, coming probably at AAN. Um, the Innovation Day, what was new? Three things. One, guiding to profitability in 2028. Peak sales of over 5 billion, 3 billion from their pipeline, 2 billion from collaborators. Two, they not on Ionis was that everything they're doing is cool and all, but there's always somebody behind them who's better with siRNA. Well, they have their own siRNA platform now, and they've unveiled now out of nowhere phase 1 data for their ApoC3. It's their own competitor to their own Tryngolza, which is monthly with an ASO. With the siRNA, they're getting 90% reduction, same as the monthly, except if you look at the PK, it supports every 6 months or once annual dosing. So that came out of nowhere, and that's going into phase 2. And then finally, they've rolled a whole new chemistry with an siRNA platform, now even targeting muscle, and they're going into HFpEF and heart failure. So, plus, I didn't even mention a host of other kind of smaller drugs, including Alexander disease that just hit in a pivotal, but it's going to be a small drug, but they're launching that probably next year. So, bottom line is, they used to say, I'm dating myself. This is not your grandfather's, Oldsmobile. This is not, old school Ionis. There's actually a lot going on there.
All right. Well, thank you, Yaron. Always exciting to see, to see companies really reinventing themselves and capturing a lot of investor interest and innovation. It's amazing to think, just going back, winding back a couple of years, right? When Ionis said, "Hey, we're not really going to commercialize our own stuff. Let's like spin that out and, really focus on like R&D and kind of like, pipeline stuff and doing deals." And now really bringing that back in house and turning themselves into a, commercial company that now has, many more wholly owned programs. So that's a real shift for the company. Let's move on to some regulatory updates that we got this week. Brian, why don't you kick us off with Lexeo?
Yeah, so Lexeo Therapeutics, another gene therapy company, they're working in the cardiac space. Their lead program is in cardiomyopathy due to Friedrich's ataxia, LX2006. This name, they've gone through a phase one study, a dose finding study in cardiomyopathy FA patients. And, I think, we know sort of the history of some of these FA drugs. And I think a lot of people think of it as sort of a neurological disease, but most of the patients ultimately die of cardiovascular issues. So there's a huge cardiac component to it, and that's really what they're targeting here. So maybe kind of more slanted towards the older side of patients who have more progressive disease, and FA is a very interesting disease because it is monogenic. Patients have this diminished capability of producing functional frataxin, and this is a frataxin replacement therapy. And they shown very good ability to increase frataxin expression in cardiac biopsies. It does seem to have a dose relationship across the 3 doses that they've tested. And a big question here is around the flexibility of CBER and gene therapy, obviously, and I know we're going to talk about this in a minute, but obviously the last iteration of the CBER administration under Peter Marks was extremely flexible, offered a lot of flexibility to gene therapy companies in orphan disease in general. And with sort of the changing of the guard, there's been a lot of questions how much of that flexibility will still be applied, especially given the current head of CBER, who's sort of been very critical of the Peter Marks flexibility dynamic. Lexeo offered 2 updates today. Earlier this week, one a regulatory update, as well as providing some additional long-term clinical data from their initial study. I would say the overall picture I thought looked really positive on the clinical update side of things. The primary thing they're looking at here is left ventricular mass volume. This is a measure that's already sort of been blessed by the prior iteration of the FDA in Rocket's Danon disease case, and they're sort of hopefully have been relying on sort of the same guidance that was provided to the Danon program to try to make the case here that statistically significant reductions in LVMI that would be 10% or greater over a certain time period would be an approvable endpoint on a surrogate endpoint. The FDA had already sort of said yes to this earlier in the year. They had an additional meeting and announced that LVMI would not just continue to be one of the co-primary endpoints in a pivotal study, in addition to frataxin expression. But they also offered hints that the flexibility was even leaning maybe a little more flexible than we had previously expected. The FDA is apparently letting them pool data from their phase 1, 2, and the planned pivotal study, so that this could potentially lower the overall sample size from the pivotal study that they're planning to start in the first half of 2026. So there's offering some statistical flexibility that we don't normally see, sort of the pooling of data across 2 clinical studies for a primary analysis. And the other thing is, I think everyone expected really that the time frame for LVMI measurement would be at 12 months. And while they haven't specified what the actual time frame for LVMI measurement is going to wind up being, they said that it's probably going to be less than 12 months that the FDA is offering an earlier time frame for analysis. And when you look across the LVMI data that they've seen so far in patients who are have impaired baseline LVMI, they are crossing that threshold of 10% pretty rapidly by 6 months. So this might wind up being a evaluation period that is almost half of what was expected. The sample size coming down, that will certainly allow them to run a more rapid pivotal study. But I think overall, just kind of in my view, and certainly for me, it gives me a little more encouragement that CBER isn't really moving into a much more conservative methodology for evaluating gene therapies in orphan diseases, and is continuing to if not totally carry on in the Peter Marks tradition, is at least still offering a high level of flexibility for these diseases that are really major unmet medical needs with not a lot of options for patients.
Great.
Again,
Great. Well, thank you, Brian. Certainly, certainly encouraging. And you mentioned Peter Marks. What about Peter Marks?
so Sam, you want to take that? I think that's under
Well, I
your
mean,
bullet, but we can talk.
what do we say? I mean, it's funny. Some Adam was saying on the podcast they do that he thought it'd be Sarepta, and that would have been so much more fun for him, which of course it would have been. But look, it's not going to be helpful, is it? At the end of the day, an FDA regulator that was potentially a little bit controversial did go to a pharma company, Eli Lilly in this case. And what is he going to be doing there? Who wants to take that? I mean, the title doesn't really tell us much. But it's, I mean, look, I can't, I don't want to sit here and criticize people who come out of a job where they were essentially, I don't know, do you want to call it pushed out? Um, to take a job to carry on doing what they believe is value added for the future of drug development, but it's just not very helpful for the cause at the minute. That's all I can say, to be honest with you.
Can I chime in?
Please.
So I'm going to take the other side. Yeah, so I will definitely take the other side here. He has unbelievable skill set that is going to be put to use in a very valuable company, and he's by far not the first one in any industry or from any government job to then go into industry. And we see this over and over again. People coming into on the finance side, people going into consulting firm, people become lobbyists, and this is just a natural extension of sort of what's next. I don't know that. Look, he's got to work presumably. Going to be an academician, I don't know is really where his skill set necessarily is. His skill set is in drug development, and if you think about doing good for humanity and for patients, it's a perfect role. I honestly don't look. I remember back in the days, there used to be, if you left medicine and you went into industry, it was like sacrilegious. I think over time, people realize that an ecosystem is built of many partners. And this is a great example. I think he's going to do amazing work next. And I'm very happy that he's doing that as opposed to just,
I
hanging
agree
up the
with you, Yaron.
shoes.
I didn't want to for a moment sound that I was critical of him. So just to be clear about that, it's just, what are you going to do? It's not going to look great. And the folks who want to use this as an example of the, what's it called? The swinging door, or I can't remember now, revolving door, are going to, yeah,
Revolving
are
door,
going to
right?
use it. But, again, as you rightly say, he's got a lot to offer and he's gone somewhere where he can do it. So great.
Yeah. And I didn't mean to, I
No,
wasn't,
I know.
coming
You can
coming
come at me
directly at you.
anytime you
So
like.
but no, but it's more of a, this is a broader conversation about, what should the public maybe expect? Look, there's always going to be naysayers. There's always going to be
Mm.
critics, right? It's very easy to be a Monday morning quarterback, and I'm guilty of that. I scream at the TV as my kids tell me, they can't hear you. But you know, at the end of the day, look, I think that look, the average person, I think, maybe need to not be so critical.
Yeah.
It's my
I
opinion.
I
But
am very much,
Tess,
yes.
just before you wrap up,
Yeah.
I think we need to stay on for another 5 hours because apparently AstraZeneca is going to announce its deal with the administration.
Oh My goodness. Okay, well, everyone who wants to stay on until 6 o'clock, you're welcome to. Uh, but I think this point is a really important one around like, yes, you can talk about revolving door, and certainly I think it's important that you don't have that you don't have people making decisions in regulatory positions where they're like favoring a company because of like a certain economics or a certain relationship. But like, what are ways to resolve that? Like disclosure is one, and recusing yourself from like certain decisions are others, right? Like we have so many ways of managing conflicts of interest. I think what's much worse for our sector is if like people aren't talking to each other and we're not getting expert opinions on the right things, right? I mean, how much are you really going to learn from an advisory committee related to, say, a multiple myeloma drug, where you can't find a multiple myeloma expert who, maybe hasn't been involved in a trial that has involved some kind of like, industry compound. So I think that, thinking about like the mechanisms to manage those conflicts is like way more important than just saying like, my gosh, there shall be no connectivity or discussion or knowledge of what the other people are doing. I mean, that really leads to suboptimal decisions. So I think we will
Well,
leave it at that. Just exciting week for continued interest in biopharma, both from strategics and from investors, and a lot of fundamental progress that supports that. And thank you so much, Brian and Yaron and Luba and Sam, for sharing your perspectives. See everyone next week.